There exists a cycle of extremism, a tendency for self-escalating extremism, a vicious cycle that causes first philosophic chaos and then political disaster. This tendency is an illness that afflicts many radical political groups. Radicalism comes to be seen as a virtue, and cautiousness a weakness. Radicalism becomes a virtue, and soon radicalism is pursued mindlessly. In many radical political communities, the most extreme position comes to be seen as the boldest, strongest, most admirable one. The brave position, the great position, the radical position. And soon we see radicalism for the sake of radicalism. There is nothing wrong with radicalism, but there is something wrong with radicalism for the sake of radicalism. We regularly see this. Radical communities become the location of constant hot-take competitions and extremist virtue signals. Soon we see people adopting increasingly deranged positions in the name of radicalism. This causes massive division and gives rise to idiotic ideas. A political group cannot survive if its members are constantly trying to outcompete each other in the realm of radicalism. This extremism for the sake of extremism is seen on both sides of the political spectrum. Many on the far left will adopt increasingly ridiculous positions to virtue signal about their extremism and win the hot take competition. Soon we have people calling for the abolition of every social construct they can think of. Many on the far right will adopt increasingly ridiculous positions to virtue signal about their extremism and win the hot take competition. Soon we have people adopting increasingly hateful and bloodthirsty views for the sake of demonstrating their loyalty to reactionary extremism. In order to demonstrate their unwavering loyalty to the extremist movement, they embrace increasingly extreme positions. The extremists constantly try to outcompete one another to virtue signal about how they are the most extreme. The extremists constantly try to demonstrate that they are the most devoted to extremism. Such tendencies easily infect extremist political communities. Such tendencies cause people to embrace increasingly ridiculous ideas. Such tendencies cause massive division and make unity and cooperation impossible. This is a strong tendency on both the far left and the far right. There is a tendency to move towards the most shocking extremist position in the name of proving oneself as a true extremist. This competitive virtue signalling, these hot take competitions, they repeatedly lead to idiotic ideas and political division. Radicalism for the sake of radicalism is not a good thing. It is a cause of increasingly ridiculous and unjustifiable positions. The endless competition to prove who is more radical, committed, and loyal to the cause. Cautiousness and skepticism comes to be seen as weakness in a rush to the extremes. This is exhibited in both far left and far right communities. Extremism comes to be seen as good in of itself. To be the most moderate person in the room comes to be regarded as synonymous with being the weakest person in the room. Extremism comes to be regarded as ideological strength. People pursue extremism for the sake of it. People rush to the extremes and virtue signal constantly. Soon people begin arriving at the most ridiculous radical positions that they can. This is taken as proof of their strength and commitment to the cause. In truth, it is mindless idiocy exemplified. In pursuit of increasingly radical and shocking virtue signals, they move closer and closer to the political poles. They gravitate towards the radical, not because reason demands it, but because they must virtue signal their commitment to political extremism. They are not a weak and naive, moderate liberal. They are a radical extremist who has shocking views. People must not base their political beliefs on virtue signalling to the extremist flock. There is nothing wrong with radicalism, but there is something wrong with radicalism for the sake of radicalism. There is nothing wrong with having shocking extremist views, but there is something wrong with having shocking extremist views for the sake of having shocking extremist views. There is nothing wrong with having extreme beliefs, but there is something wrong with seeking to embrace the most extreme positions you can. It does concern me when I see people abandon reasoning to the assumption that they will naturally slide towards one pole or the other. Moving further in any political direction is not natural or necessary. All ideological movement must be based on reason, not direction. We must not naturally gravitate towards the extreme or the moderate. A great many are guilty of naturally gravitating towards the extreme or the moderate. A great many are guilty of assuming that the extreme or the moderate possesses innate validity. The reality is that we must base our political positions on reasoning. I know that some will deny that this is a problem. Such denialism is gravely mistaken. Anyone who has spent 5 minutes around far-left or far-right extremists will know that a great many of them have a tendency to become consumed by a mindless desire for extremism, be it for the sake of virtue signalling, feeling extreme, or completing a satisfying political journey. This tendency is a common one, and it explains a large number of ridiculous views that continually arise from the political fringes. This is not to paint with too broad of a brush. I consider myself to be relatively radical. I think that many radicals are not afflicted by this plague, but a great many are. We should seek to overcome it. We should not be radical for the sake of being radical. We should be radical because reason demands it, because it very often does.